Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sonia Gray and this is From the South, the evening news brief from Tell Us Your English, and we start this new edition right now. The group Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, the Argentine human rights organization that was created in the 1970s to search for kidnapped babies during the dictatorship, have announced that they have found their 127th grandchild. Between 1976 and 1983, an estimated 30,000 people suspected of being against the military dictatorship were disappeared. President of Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, Estrella de Carlotto, said the grandchild's parents went missing in 1977 during the Dirty War.
Maria del Carmen and Carlos were kidnapped in Córdoba. She was between 8 and 9 months pregnant. The couple was seen by survivors in the clandestine detention center, the Perla, in Córdoba. Later, Maria del Carmen was transferred to the ESMA detention center, where she gave birth to a little girl.
And after the announcement, the Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo held a press conference where the organization reiterated its resolve to continue the search for children who, so long ago, were forcibly separated from their families. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Carolina Silvestre, filed this report.
Today marks a special day for Argentinians after a press conference provided more details about the search for granddaughter number 127 by the Grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo. The Grandmothers, human rights organizations, granddaughter 127, aunts, and granddaughter 126 were present at the press conference and made a compromise to continue the search for the 400 grandchildren still missing. Granddaughter 127's family members have let her know that they expect her with open arms and that she has all the time in the world to accept her newfound identity. It continued to be an eventful day after it was announced that Miguel Echcolatz will be confined to house arrest. This was a topic that slightly tainted the press conference, but Estrella de Carlotto said that what mattered today was a successful search for granddaughter 127, and that eventually, starting tomorrow, human rights organizations will look for a unified strategy to revert this failure of justice.
Marred by widespread protests and rejection from numerous sectors of Argentine society, the Senate went ahead and brought into law economic reforms proposed by the president, with the support of some governors and the bloc led by Miguel Ángel Pincheto. Details in the next report.
Following a long session and with the support of some of the governors, the upper house has turned into law Macri's controversial tax reform, the 2018 budget, and the extension of the check tax.
This will end when this government reaches its limit with the fund, taking into account that the macroeconomic conditions left by our government have helped them continue with this debt. So this will end with the mission fund asking, what is it that you own? 400,000 millions? Well, here it is. And now this is the economic, political, and social program for Argentina for the next 60 years.
The opposition denounced that the gradual reduction of the income tax for large companies and the cut of employer contributions are measures that will directly affect the workers and the most vulnerable sectors of society.
Gradualism can be applied to benefit the poor or benefit the rich. And what we see in this package of laws is that a project is being carried out that favors the rich. Don't they listen, or are we deaf? The system of promissory notes issued by the central bank is a great business for the financial system. Don't we remember that this happened already in Argentina? It has happened many times.
While it is true that some blocs have defended the tax on financial income, continue to give tax cuts to those who have the most.
Here's where I doubt, and I say, it isn't that they don't realize, it's just that they have another model of society in their heads. They want a hierarchy society where those who always had more will continue to do so, and those who never had anything will have to stay down. because they think this is the best way to get lower wages for workers, but it's really incomprehensible.
With the postponement on the labour reforms treatment for the month of February, the last project voted by unanimously was the creation of a commission to investigate what happened with the submarine that disappeared last November 15th in the South Atlantic.
Thursday saw President Pablo Kaczynski being questioned by anti-corruption prosecutors over his links to the Odebrecht scandal. Meanwhile, Peruvians took to the streets in protest of his recent decision to pardon disgraced former president, Alberto Fujimori. The pardon has caused strong reaction from citizens who feel it invalidates the struggles of those who suffered under Fujimori's rule. Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has the details.
Muchas gracias por el pase. El día de hoy una jornada de protesta.
A day of demonstrations is taking effect on Thursday, not just in Lima, but all throughout the country and abroad. People have gathered under the slogan, "Pardon is an insult," strongly rejecting President Kaczynski's recent pardon of former dictator Alberto Fujimori. This act greatly endangers the rights of the thousands of victims of Fujimori's dictatorship. Victims who weren't just put at risk, but were oftentimes murdered and made to disappear. This includes union leaders, who were also persecuted and jailed by this regime. What people will be demanding on the streets is for President Kaczynski to nullify this humanitarian pardon. People also plan to speak with certain organizations to find out what their legal options are, such as appealing to the judicial power, the Constitutional Court, Congress, and even international organizations. Rallies were also held on Wednesday in Cusco, where students have been protesting for 3 days. Clashes with police forces have been reported, and some students are still being detained by the state, which has pushed demonstrators to also demand an end to police repression and persecution toward those who are voicing their disapproval of Alberto Fujimori's pardon.
Ayer hubo protestas también en Cusco, una región al sur del Perú, donde estudiantes
And UN human rights experts have condemned the pardon of former President Alberto Fujimori by the current President Pablo Kaczynski. They have said that they are appalled by the decision and that Fujimori's guilt is not in question and he does not meet the legal requirements for a pardon. Fujimori had served 12 years of a 25-year sentence for corruption and human rights crimes during his right-wing government's rule from 1990 to 2000. The Peruvian Minister of Culture has resigned in response to the controversial pardon. On Wednesday, Salvador del Solar announced that he had handed in his resignation as a demonstration of his rejection of the Fujimori pardon. Other members of Kaczynski's cabinet, like the head of the public television and radio station, Hugo Cuya, have also resigned for the same reason. And relatives of those murdered by death squads in the 1990s have been expressing their dismay at the pardon granted to former President Alberto Fujimori. The family members called the decision by President Pedro Pablo Kaczynski a betrayal. Fujimori was serving 25 years in prison for 2 massacres carried out under his presidency, when thousands more civilians died during the counter-insurgency campaign he oversaw.
It's very painful. What will my son say? I've continued for 25 years looking for justice for Amaro.
There's a betrayal against us. I voted for him. Both times, in the first and second rounds, I voted for him. I believed in him. But as I said, this is the second time that I trusted in a president and that they have failed me.
The final leg of the Jamaican edition of the CARICOM Reparations Youth Baton Relays and Rallies ended in the parish of St. James. The 3-month relay took the reparations baton all over the island to strengthen the Caribbean community's reparations fight. Race events were used to take a closer look at the horrors of slavery and discuss how it continues to affect Caribbean economies. Similar relays have taken place in Barbados, Guyana, and St. Lucia. More news in a minute, so stay with us. Women's organizations are protesting in Panama against the high rate of femicide cases in 2017. Holding banners and using the phrase, "not one more," they demanded justice and denounced the government of President Juan Carlos Varela, saying he isn't properly addressing the need to solve or prevent cases of violence against women. Around 17 femicides have been reported in 2017.
We have been asking for decades for the government and for society to not be indifferent to the thousands of women that have been murdered. Today, we have 17 victims of femicide and 12,000 reports of domestic violence in Panama. And those are the ones that were brave enough to say something. But there are a lot more. And we want to be very clear. Those women could be very close to being killed.
Also in Panama, social movements have marched on the National Assembly to protest against impunity in the judicial system. Our correspondent, Hugo Ferreira, has more information in the next reports.
We are outside the National Assembly where social organizations are protesting against impunity in the country. At this very moment, there is a session in the Assembly to ratify 2 Supreme Court judges that were nominated by the Panamanian executive power. Social movement said that these 2 judges advocate for impunity involving high-profile corruption cases. Over the last couple of months, the Supreme Court has dismissed 5 corruption cases that included fraud and misappropriation of public funds under the administration of former President Ricardo Martinelli. Social leaders are concerned that if these judges are part of the Supreme Court, they will dismiss cases linked to Aldrich and other companies who engaged in bribery in order to win special contracts. These social groups are going to keep protesting under the phrase "no more impunity" to demand the legislative power to stop the ratification inside the Supreme Court.
Hugo Vera with that report. In Chile, representatives of social and indigenous organizations from the Valparaiso region have met to discuss the environmental evaluation resolution regarding the construction of the thermoelectric plant Los Rulios. Details in the next report.
The thermoelectric project Los Rulos survived an eventful day during the new session of the Environmental Evaluation Service. The invalidation requests presented by the area's indigenous communities were rejected unanimously.
Additional measures were taken, like installing monitors which would be able to control the air quality, so that it guarantees that this project would not affect it.
The government presented mitigation proposals that did not consider the community's demands, who had presented 2 official requests to stop the construction of the thermoelectric power plant because it would affect the global biosphere reserve within the region.
It is proof of an environmental institution that is at the service of 1% of the country, at the service of energy business companies, and is not at the service of indigenous peoples, and neither at the service of the communities.
One of the requests was the removal of the environmental permit because of their failure to file an indigenous query under the standards of ILO's Convention 169. The authorities thought that the communities were not in the area that is most affected.
This is very painful, but in the end, it is the international courts that are going to be in favor of the indigenous communities regarding the query.
The social organizations have already announced that they will go to more senior authorities to stop the installation of the thermoelectric because its construction would cause a direct threat to the biodiversity and the health of the communities.
We're going to the Committee of Ministers, but we don't expect anything because they're politically aligned. But we're also going to the environmental courts, where we hope to find a better decision that upholds what the Constitution says about living in a pollution-free environment.
It is still to be seen if the project will depend or not on the next government. What is clear is that the protest will continue.
As 2018 approaches, some Brazilians are thinking about the upcoming elections as a way to restore the democracy that has been challenged since the coup that overthrew President Dilma Rousseff. The possibility that former President Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva would not be a part of the elections due to an ongoing court case has many supporters worried.
In the midst of celebrations for the coming year, many Brazilians think of 2018 as the year in which elections would restore democratic order to their country after the coup against Dilma Rousseff.
Elections are our only hope. We cannot go on like this.
The most popular candidate is former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, but his candidacy hinges on a decision by the Federal Regional Court of the 4th Region of Porto Alegre. On January 24th, the court will rule on an appeal presented by Lula's attorneys after Judge Sergio Moro sentenced him to 9.5 years in prison.
Brazil's justice is always late to pass judgment, but when the accused is Lula, they move fast in order to put an end to his candidacy. That's the way it is.
Judge Moro's sentence is ratified. The former president would be ruled out of the elections, but Brazilians believe that an election without Lula is akin to fraud and demonstrations that are being organized in his support.
We have planned a great demonstration to show that what's right is to defend democracy and to defend Lula's candidacy so that he can form a government that allows us to move forward.
In Brazil, the New Year's festivities are called Réveillon, a word that stems from French and means to awake. This is precisely what Brazilians want in 2018, elections that awake Brazil to a better and more just future.
23 communities from the municipality of Tecolucha in El Salvador want to go into the new year with new restrictions on the use of agrochemicals. 6 national sugar companies support the measure and are calling for an end to the practice of burning sugarcane because of the risk to public health. Let's take a look at the details in this next report.
Rosa Cepeda lives with her family in the area known as Bajo Limpa. This region is characterized by being one of the most exploited by the sugarcane industries and therefore one of the most contaminated with agrotoxins. Her family is sick.
Sometimes my eyes burn. Sometimes I get sick. We are really affected. Around here, there are some sick people. They have kidney problems. My mom too, as well as my little daughter.
Around 5,000 people in the area are affected by the use of glyphosate, a chemical produced by the multinational Monsanto and used by the sugarcane industry as a maturative of the cane, applied in most cases by air.
They distribute the chemical by plane to the sugarcane plantations, but it spreads into our farms and houses, where people and children become affected.
They are not only treated with maturing herbicides, but also with poisons to fight the pests of the cane. In most cases, the organic cultivation of cocoa and basic grains are run by the communities who are complaining about the contamination of the water they use for their irrigation.
They apply insecticides for the white fly and for the wire worm. There is a lot. It is a chemical bomb that is thrown over the cane to eradicate or at least control the insects that damage the crop of the cane.
The situation is exacerbated by the burning of plantations that affect the air, increasing respiratory diseases. Although there is a municipal ordinance that protects the environment, protected wetlands like Laguna Los Conejos are affected.
Due to the excessive burning, the wildlife that lives in these crops is lost. That means that these animals die if the cane plantation is set on fire.
The demands of the communities are simple. The use of agrotoxin substances should be regulated by the Ministry of Agriculture. The exploitation of water resources should be regulated, contamination of protected areas has to be avoided, and the practice of burning the sugarcane needs to be stopped.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. George Weah has been elected president of Liberia in what was the former football star's second attempt at running for the post. With most ballots from Tuesday's runoff vote counted, Mr. Weah is well ahead of his leading opponent, Joseph Boakai. He succeeds Africa's first elected female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, in Liberia's first democratic handover in decades.
It'll happen because he is our president. We call him so many names. They say he's not educated, he's not competent, but this is the man that had a dream come true. I am too excited. George Weah, the president of Liberia.
This country would be going from different government to different government. Because this is a democratic process in the country. We want to see the right government for our people. For the people of the Republic of Liberia, that is why we elect George Mani Weah as President of the Republic of Liberia.
Pro-Catalan independent leader of the Popular Unity candidacy, CUP, Marta Llorens and Oriole Ciurana have walked free from court after refusing to testify. The two CUP representatives were charged with inciting hatred after condemning the violent suppression by the Spanish National Police during the October 1st referendum. Crowds of supporters holding signs demanding freedom for all Catalan political prisoners greeted the leaders upon their release. And as a goodwill gesture, Pakistan has released 145 Indian fishermen held for allegedly fishing in its territorial waters. Fishermen from Pakistan and India are frequently detained for illegally fishing in each other's territorial waters, since the Arabian Sea does not have a clearly defined marine border and wooden boats lack the technology to avoid drifting away. Many are left in jail beyond their sentences.
It feels very nice to go back home. We were caught in the Pakistani area while catching fish, and we're in Pakistan's prisons for the past 10 months. Now that we're going back to our home, we're feeling very happy.
We are thankful to the government of Pakistan that they have released us. We are happy that we will be able to meet our family, our wives, our kids and parents. We will celebrate this.
We're taking them to Wagah border. We're happy that the government of Pakistan has released them. The remaining will also get released. I appeal to India that they too release the Pakistani prisoners. I request both governments not to keep them in prison for too long, because these are poor people and their families have to face a lot of difficulties.
4 inmates have escaped from a city prison in Berlin by making a hole in a wall and escaping via car. The escapees are being sought by Berlin police after breaking out of the city's central Plötzensky jail. It is still unclear whether the escapees had accomplices or which tools they used to make the hole in the wall near a ventilation shaft. Erica Garner, the daughter of a NYPD chokehold victim, Eric Garner, is in a medically induced coma. After video of her father's death in 2014 resurfaced, Erica became a verbal advocate for police reform in the United States and a key figure of the Black Lives Matter movement. An update on her official Twitter account reveals that Erica suffered major brain damage from a lack of oxygen during a heart attack. In Spain, firefighters are struggling to tackle a massive blade that ripped through Mallorca Island. A joint task force of firefighters have been working non-stop to tackle a huge fire up to 5 kilometers high. But strong winds are impeding the firefighting operation. Some 60 properties were evacuated as a precaution. The fire was caused by electrical faults at a substation in the area. On Wednesday, Ukrainian and separatist rebels in the east of the country exchanged hundreds of prisoners in one of the biggest swaps since the conflict began in 2014. According to the terms of the deal, Kiev was meant to hand over 306 prisoners to the rebels and in return receive 74 prisoners who had been held by pro-Russian rebels in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. More prisoners are expected to change hands in 2018. Now let's have a look at some of the stories making headlines around the world.
The number of casualties has reached 41 in the Kabul suicide attack, and has injured 84 people. Islamic State claimed responsibility for the suicide bombing of an office of the Afghan news agency and a neighboring Shia cultural center. Amongst the victims, many were students who had come to attend a conference.
I saw many dead in the area. I was looking for my cousin, but I could not find his body. Not sure what happened to him. The number of dead people has increased.
A second batch of 6 Syrian civilians, most of them children, have left the besieged rebel enclave of eastern Ghouta, but hundreds of critical patients remain trapped. A total of 29 emergency medical cases are expected to be evacuated under a deal with the government that saw rebels release several men, including workers detained during the fierce clashes with the army in March. As Liberia waits for the result of the presidential runoff election, former football star George Weah claims he is on track for victory. But his opponent, Vice President Joseph Boakai, says it's too close to call. The results are expected to be announced today.
So far, the results have been coming, and we know that CDC is in the lead. But being in the lead are not giving you the results. So we're hoping that the result comes very soon to know who will be winning this election.
A blast ripped through a supermarket in Russia, St. Petersburg, Wednesday evening, injuring at least 10 shoppers. It was not clear what was the motive behind the blast. Russian President Putin has said that the bombing was an act of terror. Zimbabwe's ex-army chief Constantino Chiwenga has been sworn in as Zimbabwe's vice president, along with the veteran politician Kembo Mohadi. Last month, Chiwenga led a de facto coup that ended Robert Mugabe's 37-year rule. He is the latest in a string of military leaders to be elevated to government positions.
China has kicked off its annual winter fishing festival at the frozen Chagan Lake in northeastern province of Jilin. A grand opening ceremony started with the centuries-old tradition of praying for good harvest. Winter fishing on ice-covered Chagan Lake dates back to the 10th century. Over 100,000 tourists are expected to come this year and feast themselves on fresh fish from the lake. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching.